By the late 1930s, nearly every rural home in America stored food underground. No electricity, just the earth itself keeping produce fresh for 6 to 8 months. Frontier families devoted a fifth of their homestead budget to digging these cellars. Then, in barely 2 generations, the knowledge vanished. The story of how underground storage fed families through entire winters and why we forgot begins long before refrigeration existed. Long before electric wires reached the countryside, the rhythm of survival depended on what could be stored beneath the earth. Across the American frontier, families carved out stone-lined chambers, sometimes large enough to hold 3 or even 5 tons of food, directly into the hillside or under the barn. The scent inside these places was always the same: cool, damp, a trace of earth and potato skin. Diaries from the Ohio River Valley speak of children hauling baskets of turnips down into the dark, while parents checked for leaks in the packed clay walls. In some households, as much as a fifth of the entire homestead budget went to digging and lining these cellars, a cost weighed against the certainty of winter hunger. But this was not a uniquely American invention. The tradition reached back across the Atlantic, where stone storage pits have been unearthed in medieval villages from Scandinavia to Portugal. Archaeologists have found chambers dating to the 10th century, each holding the remains of grain, apples, and beans, evidence that the earth itself was trusted with the harvest. Manor records from the Middle Ages list root cellars as basic household assets, with some storing up to 5 tons of produce for the lean months. In alpine towns, these underground rooms kept cabbage and sauerkraut edible through winters so harsh that nothing grew for half the year. Generations learned to read the scent of stone and soil as a sign of safety, a quiet assurance that the family would eat until spring returned. The crash of 1929 sent shockwaves through rural America, but in the hardest years that followed, one solution spread quietly from neighbor to neighbor, digging deeper into the earth. By the mid-1930s, government bulletins from the Works Progress Administration urged families to build or restore root cellars, promising that a cool, dark chamber could mean the difference between a full table and going hungry. WPA community workshops filled church basements and grange halls, where men and women learned to line cellar walls with fieldstone or pour sand over crates of potatoes. In towns across Kansas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest, nearly every rural home stored produce underground by the end of the decade. Farm surveys from 1935 and 1940 show that about 70% of American farms listed a cellar among their buildings, a figure that climbed even higher in regions battered by drought or crop failure. Food preservation clubs, often led by women like Elsie's mother, swapped recipes for pickled beets and shared tips on keeping apples crisp until Easter. For her, and for millions of others, the underground room was more than a storage space. It was a promise that winter could be survived. The secret to root cellaring lies in the Earth's ability to create a stable microclimate, one that holds steady even as frost and heat sweep across the landscape above. Extension bulletins and modern university guides agree on the fundamentals. A well-built cellar maintains a temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and relative humidity between 85 and 95%. These conditions slow the natural respiration of vegetables, keeping them crisp and edible for up to 8 months. There are 3 classic types of root cellars. The first is the hillside or dugout cellar, carved directly into a slope and lined with stone or brick. The second is the pit or barrel cellar, where a drum or garbage can is buried with only a lid visible at ground level. The third is the basement-adapted cellar, partitioned off from the rest of a house, often with added earth insulation and a vent to the outside. Each design uses the insulating power of soil, at least 18 inches overhead, to buffer against daily temperature swings and to trap moisture. Certain crops thrive in these underground rooms. Potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, and parsnips keep best at the lower end of the temperature range, packed in layers of damp sand or sawdust to prevent shriveling. Apples and pears prefer slightly warmer spots, often stored higher up on wooden shelves where air circulates. Cabbage, onions, and even some cheeses and cured meats can last for months if kept dry and cool. Burlap sacks, wooden crates, and straw are used to separate produce and absorb excess moisture. A simple thermometer and hygrometer are enough to monitor conditions. With careful layering, roots below, fruits above, and a tray of wet sand for humidity, families could open the cellar door in February to find their autumn harvest nearly as fresh as the day it was picked. This low-tech system, proven by generations and validated by modern tests, can keep food safe and nutritious for half a year or more, all without a single watt of electricity. By the end of World War II, a quiet revolution was underway in American kitchens. In 1940, fewer than half of farm households owned a refrigerator. Within just a decade, that figure had soared to over 75%, and by 1960, nearly every home, urban and rural, relied on electric cooling. This rapid adoption was driven not just by the spread of affordable electricity, but by changes in daily life. As more women entered the workforce during and after the war, the demand for labor-saving devices surged. Appliance manufacturers responded with aggressive marketing, promising spotless kitchens and effortless meals. Between 1940 and 1950, studies show a 25% jump in household appliance ownership, closely tied to rising rates of women's employment. At the same time, the supermarket was transforming how families shopped and ate. Once, rural households planned for months of scarcity, but the rise of national grocery chains meant fresh produce could be bought year-round. The need to store hundreds of pounds of potatoes or apples for the winter faded as weekly shopping trips became the norm. Agricultural extension bulletins, which once devoted pages to root cellar construction, shifted their focus to freezer storage and canning. WPA oral histories that once described the daily routines of cellar maintenance became rare, replaced by stories of modern convenience. By the late 1950s, the root cellar had become a relic, often left to fill with cobwebs or repurposed for storm shelters. The cultural memory of underground storage, once passed from parent to child, slipped away in just 2 generations. Yet the underlying need for food security and resilience never truly vanished. Only the methods changed, waiting for a new reason to resurface. Sam stands in the checkout line, watching the numbers climb higher on the register. Grocery prices are up again, and the thought of another electric bill makes her wince. She's not alone. Across the country, families are searching for ways to stretch every dollar and keep food on the table. The Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association has published a chart comparing energy use. A root cellar draws 0 kilowatt hours, while the average refrigerator burns through about 400 kilowatt hours a year. That's enough to run a light bulb for over 4 years straight. For Sam, the appeal goes beyond saving money. The past few years have exposed how fragile the food supply chain can be. Empty shelves, late trucks, and produce that spoils before it's unpacked. A root cellar promises something different: months of food security, no matter what happens to the grid. The idea is simple. Use the steady cool of the earth to keep food fresh, with no wires, no humming motor, and no monthly bill. Sam decides it's time to try the old way herself. Sam drags a battered 55-gallon drum into the backyard and marks out a circle in the dirt. The shovel bites in, and after 2 hours, the pit is deep enough to swallow the barrel with room for a thick blanket of earth on top. She lines up the parts: a salvaged drum, 2 lengths of PVC pipe, a bag of sand, and a borrowed hammer. Total cost, just under $50, even with a new vent cap from the hardware store. The drum drops in, snug against the cool soil. Sam cuts a small hole near the base for the intake pipe, another at the top for the exhaust. She packs sand around the bottom, then slides the PVC through, sealing the joints with silicone caulk. The lid gets a layer of weather stripping and a makeshift handle from scrap wood. She buries the drum, leaving only the cap and vent pipes visible above ground. Inside, a digital thermometer and hygrometer blink to life. By sundown, the numbers settle. 39 degrees Fahrenheit, 92% humidity. No wires, no hum. Just the quiet steadiness of Earth, holding last season's carrots and apples in a pocket of cold air. Today, a root cellar can still keep food fresh for months. No electricity, no costly tech, just the earth itself. As grocery prices climb and power grids falter, that forgotten knowledge becomes power. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most resilient. What would you store for winter?